Well, good afternoon and welcome to our Facebook series called Voices of Black Faith Freedom. My name is Charles Watson Jr. and I'm the Director of Education at BJC. And today our special guest is the Reverend William H. Lamar IV. He is the pastor of the Metropolitan AME Church here in Washington, D.C. and is a powerful voice in the city. Reverend Lamar is a proud graduate of FAMU and Duke Divinity School. You probably have seen him on some syndicated TV stations and read some of his writings in the Washington Post, Huffington Post, and PBS NewsHour. And if you haven't, you should. We're glad to have him starting off our series to answer the question, what can America learn from the Black church about faith freedom? Welcome, Reverend Lamar.
Well, Charles, thank you, man. Every time I get to spend time with you, it's a blessing, man. So thank you.
Same here, same here. So we want you to join in on the conversation as well in the comments below. And you can spread the word on Twitter by using the hashtag Black Faith Freedom Voices. And make sure to tag BJC on the Hill. All right. Well, Bill, I'm trying to call you Bill. I'm so used to calling you Reverend Lamar. I'm going to try to call you Bill. Again, thank you for joining us for this important conversation here in Black History Month. And so I just want to start off, you're in the AME Church. And for those who don't know the history of the AME Church, could you please give us a brief history of how AME Church even came about? Because I believe that's faith freedom in itself.
Oh, yes, sir. So I would frame it differently than even we frame it in the denomination. The African Methodist Episcopal Church is an assertion of African theological independence, which goes way back before the African encounter in the Americas. So I am very clear. We often begin our story at St. George's Methodist Church, where white people didn't want the Black people to worship anymore. That's a historical reality for us not to look past. But when you do the research, the enslaved persons who came here came with the culture, came with the theology. And what researchers who have done work on Richard Allen, most recently Richard Newman, talks about is in the evenings after work was done, the enslaved community told stories, reconnected with the ancestral philosophical theological realities. So before Allen became a Methodist, Allen would have been steeped in those African ways of knowing who God was and thinking about the world. So just as all Christianities are syncretic, bringing together multiple faiths, multiple ways of knowing, the African Methodist Episcopal Church is an Afro-Christianity that has within it roots in African traditional religion, African ways of knowing and being. And so I refuse to start our story in 1787 in Philadelphia. Our story is as old as the sun, the moon, and the stars. We need to be clear about that and not give theological agency over to people who debased and dehumanized us. And the church is born, ultimately, when you read what was called the African Supplement that Allen and others wrote, they asserted their right to do their own theological work. That didn't start then. That started, as the poem says, when the dawns were young.
Okay, so it didn't start just with asserting the freedom that they had, but actually just the start of we can think theologically for ourselves as well.
Exactly.
Not only are we human beings, but we also can think inside of that. So we have rights that you gave to us, but we have rights that you couldn't give to us. We have them.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
And one of the things that's important to mention is we sued in the courts, the the Pennsylvania part of the Supreme Court, and won the right to be independent. So 200 plus years ago, we were always fighting to maintain that theological assertion about who we were. And that's the best of our tradition. We are not responding because you have acted upon us. We have been acting from the beginning. And that's real freedom.
Beautiful story. I'm glad you gave us that history of that. So with that being the background of how you come to this conversation, how would you define faith freedom or Black faith freedom?
I want to define it as a gift. I want to define Black faith freedom as a gift to the American empire and to American theological communities if you want to open it. Imagine it's Christmas and, you know, I don't have a tree, but you got a tree in beautiful boxes, and there's one box you refuse to open, and in that box is the greatest gift of all. Here is the gift that Black faith freedom brings. And I'll do it by telling a story because I've been preaching for 20 years now.
Go ahead, brother.
Now you my homeboy from Georgia. So my great grandfather, his name was, we called him Big Daddy. When the moon landing happened in 1969, Big Daddy and many men of his generation said, that's the problem with y'all. Y'all believe everything white folk tell you. They ain't on no moon. That's a studio somewhere in Hollywood. Here is the gift of Black faith freedom. It is the gift of innate skepticism about the American project and about American religion. Innate skepticism. His skepticism kept him alive and kept him human because he did not believe what was said to him about him. Now you have all of these scholars who are now saying, oh, American evangelicalism is problematic. Oh, it's deeply tied to whiteness and white supremacy. Big Daddy knew that 200 years, they knew that 150 years ago. They always knew that that religion was marred with white supremacist impulses, marred by settler colonial impulses. They had an epistemological reality, a way of knowing that made them deeply scrutinize everything they were told by people who had political and economic power. The majority of the United States is just waking up to that hermeneutic of suspicion. That hermeneutic of suspicion is what has kept us alive. So Black faith freedom is, in the first, an assertion of African theological independence that has always existed before history existed. And at the second, in this moment, it deeply scrutinizes and it deeply challenges everything that the American theological enterprise says about itself and everything that the American empire, the United States of America, says about itself, and measures it against an ethical standard that must be met, that has never been met in any sustained way.
I hear you saying so much, William. We have to call you William, Bill, Lamar. I hear you saying so much because you know, some Americans are just waking up to this, as you're saying, and we've had to live through this, and the AME Church has you know, birthed itself through this, along with, I would say, other traditions too. But we have this definition of Black faith freedom that lends us to scrutiny. And lends us to be able to prophetically speak towards when we see something that's not right. And so we've been doing that for a long time. So the question is, what can America learn from the Black church about faith freedom? But I kind of want to modify that. What should it have learned by now? And why doesn't it learn from this? I mean, this is a great tradition, and it's been there, and it's been spoken through many prophets from the Black church movement. Why is this missed? And what should they be learning from it?
It's missed. Let me quote a friend of my wife who was quoting Tony K. Bambara, one of my wife's favorite authors. What is it that we are going to pretend that we don't know today?
Okay.
We are going to, so here is the thing. I mean, I get at it anecdotally. Back when I was growing up, maybe when you were growing up too, Charles, you're a little younger than I am, we had the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And the official organ of the USSR was called Pravda. Pravda was propaganda. Now, Pravda in Russian means truth. Now, they knew that they were calling a lie the truth. The issue is this. We have not been as connected with the American empire for our own identity. In order to survive, our identity had to be made of something different. The reason that the majority of Americans, just white folks, just our white brothers and sisters, is because their identity is tied up in this project. And to have your identity questioned is a painful thing. It is a painful thing, deeply painful for human beings. So the reason we have not awakened, the reason we wake up every morning and pretend not to know what we know is because we do not want to do the difficult work of critiquing our identity, critiquing our history. Notice what America does is it goes around the world telling other people how to be a democracy when it is not yet learned. American Christians go around teaching other people how to be Christians, and they have not yet learned. One of the markers of an idolatrous empire, according to Willie Jennings, is a group of people who are always teachers and never assume the posture of the learner. And so what has to happen is what you can learn from us is something that should be deeply Christian. That is confession. What confession means is I do not believe my own press releases. I deeply evaluate who I am, deeply evaluate who my people are so that I can move toward the truth. And let me be clear to all of you, I am a human being, and there are things about myself that I do not wish to be awakened to. But the only path to true healing, true humanity, and what the Eastern Church would call theosis, union with God, is for me to stop believing the lies I tell myself about myself. The only hope for the United States, the only hope for the American theological enterprise is to stop believing the lies you tell yourself when you know to put the word pravda on a lie doesn't make it true.
You know, this is why I like having these series, because I can have conversation. This would be a conversation that I would have with you at any point in time. We're just allowing other people to be a part of this conversation.
Yes, sir.
And so with that, you know, I'm a country boy from Georgia, so I try to break things down into a just how can I figure this out and how can I make it plain for people to figure out in that way. And so we're closer in age than you think there, but I remember Soviet Union, USSR, all those things. But I remember also this pride that came from even my grandfather. You know, my dad, my mom's father passed away when I was 6 years old. But I remember some of the pride that he had. And I remember other people that I was around that had a pride about things that were made in America.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
and so I tell this story sometimes, and I say, the way we can try to understand propaganda and how deep it is in American culture is when we think about cars. We say, hey, we need to buy American-made, American. Throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, that was the thing. America has the best cars. America has the best cars. And then all of a sudden, we find out about this Toyota and this Honda. And then we're like, oh my goodness, these are dependable cars coming from other countries. So wait a minute. We've had this propaganda that says we have the best, but we've been excluding ourselves from things that were rich to us and could have been valuable to us by saying it was only American. And I hear some of that in what you're saying with faith freedom. When we exclude the voices, we're excluding some of the best parts of us in that, right? And so I go at that propaganda to lead into the next question. Being from Georgia, and you know, this last election season, we witnessed now Senator Raphael Warnock go through a campaign that put a spotlight on him and even his sermons. How would you, being a minister that you've been for a while now, and being thrust into the political realm, how does a minister balance being political and still remain prophetic?
That's a beautiful question. And this is something, Charles, I wrote about this some years ago. I keep thinking about it. There is no speech, written or spoken, that is not political. And by that, I mean, we speak and write toward an end. You don't just do it to do it. So to break it down, like you said, when I was a kid and I wrote a letter to a girl that I like, will you be my girlfriend? Yes or no? I wasn't just writing a letter. I had a purpose in mind. So when I preach and when I teach, when I write, I have a purpose in mind. That's political. What I share with people is this. Billy Graham, Franklin Graham, Jerry Falwell, Jerry Jr. are as political as Jeremiah Wright and William Augustus Jones and Martin Luther King and Prathia Hall and Fannie Lou Hamer and Harriet Tubman. The difference is we name our politics and we are considered to be political because our politics mitigate against the status quo. They do not have to name what they're doing as political for two reasons. First, it has the cloak of the universality of normative whiteness, right? And two, it will not be questioned because of the cloak. What we have to do is be clear. Every preacher is political. Robert Jeffress is as political as I am. His politics were, let's move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to crush the hopes of Palestinian human beings who look like Jesus and who are from the same place. His politics are no universal health care. His politics are crush the LGBTQIA community. My politics are the exact opposite. So what I need the media to start doing is when you interview Robert Jeffress, ask him the same question you asked Raphael Warnock. What are your politics? And don't allow him to say, I'm not being political. Nail him to the same tree you nail us to. Don't allow normative whiteness to allow him to hide from the fact that he is maybe even more political than I am, because he is willing to engage the tools of death to maintain the status quo with theological knowledge, theological speech. And so a minister must be political. You are political by the fact that you proclaim. The question is, will you be honest in naming your politics, and will your politics be the politics of freedom, liberation for all? Or will they be the politics of death? I'm to the point now, Charles, I'm just like, look, refusing universal health care, those are the politics of death. Refusing a living wage, politics of death. Refusing shelter, politics of death. I don't want to hear anything about the incrementalism. It is death dealing to refuse human beings those things, and America is okay with that. We must stop playing with the politics of death and calling them conservatism. Those are the politics of death, and the church has been used to do the work of death, and we must call it what it is and refuse to be complicit and to call their politics what they are.
I say to that, amen. And I also say to that, you know, there's a part of us that wants to live under this separation, left, right, liberal, conservative, evangelical, and the other side thinks about not even having a faith tradition. You know, one side is evil, the other side is not. And we start calling each other side evil. Yeah. But when we start looking at the policies of these things, policies are policies. Yeah. And there's the truth. It goes back to your analogy about the young lady. When you were writing those letters, you said, will you be my girlfriend? And I always
she said no, Charles. She said no. She said no.
well, here's the thing I say about that. When you start saying yes, no, maybe so, I used to always leave out the maybe so. Either give it to me directly, yes or no. And so that's how we have to call it when we're talking about these issues. And when we're talking about being a minister in the Black church tradition, many ministers didn't have the luxury of saying, I don't have to be political. Mm. They had to know what was going on in their communities, because so many times that was the only place that Black people could meet and talk about the issues that were meant for their salvation here on earth. And you know, we've talked many times about other things, how the idea that you can only have to think about salvation in afterlife and not think about salvation here is something that I believe the Black church can teach America about. Hey, here and now, not afterlife, here and now. We have struggles, and we have people that are having struggles here and now. So why don't we address those here and now? And that's not being partisan. That's not even being political in my eyes. That's being human beings that are open to know that this is what's going on in the world, and we should be addressing it.
So Charles, my question is, why is it that, and again, these European democracies are not perfect, but why is it in some of these the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party, nobody questions whether or not folks should have universal health care? Nobody questions it. The reason we question it in the United States, and scholars have written about this, and I encourage folks, Google it, listen to NPR, read books. The refusal to extend universal health care is rooted in white supremacy and racism. The refusal to have a living wage, rooted in white supremacy and racism. We kill more white folks by refusing to acknowledge that you and I are human. Numerically, more white people die as a result of that type of white supremacist violence.
And I guess the thing I would say to that is the reason these voices of Black faith freedom are so important is that you don't get that truth without these other voices.
Exactly.
You don't get that. And we have this thing that is now come about that says, race shouldn't matter. That's hard to do now that it's mattered for 400 years, and now we want to stop saying it matters. And race has to matter when we talk about religious freedom, because there's different lenses and there's different ideas that come from these different lenses. We have a question in the comments here that says, how do we educate the media? And we put legitimate media there in the quotation to recognize politics in white as well as Black pulpit. So back to what you were saying, how do we call a spade a spade? Is that on us to have to do? Or what how do you say address it? I know you said point it out, but is there anything else we can do with that?
Well, so I think, and I think that's a great question, that consumers of media must demand that as well. So if you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, which, by the way, are normally progressive until they're not, liberal until they're not, you demand, if you talk, let me give you an example about this normative gaze of whiteness that Toni Morrison talked about in Playing in the Dark. They were doing in Tallahassee, Macon's my hometown, moved to Tallahassee when I was an early teen. They were doing features of local ministers. Now follow me. They did 2 on 2 prominent white ministers and then 2 on 2 prominent Black ministers. Now the 80s, they were all men. I read all 4 articles looking to see, as a 13-year-old, how they were gonna talk about the Black ones. The white ones, they said nothing about what they drove or their clothing. Within the first 2 paragraphs of talking about the 2 Black ministers, they talked about the cars they drove and the clothing they wore. Now, why is that important? It's important because they don't even know how deeply these stereotypes are deforming their supposed objectivity. The reason you ask me about my politics are because you too are bought into the politics of the status quo, and you see my politics as aberrant or that they will upset your power. So you got to call that out because you are afraid of it, but you will not name. Here's the thing. Let's go back. Let's say, Charles, you and I are in Greensboro, North Carolina, 1955. There's a segregated white church. Our pastor, let's say, is Prathia Hall, and Prathia is preaching a horn off the Billy Goat. And me and you say, man, we just heard Dr. Prathia. We're going to go to First Baptist White Church, Greensboro. We go down there on Sunday. They won't let us in. And their pastor is preaching segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation, both political. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do the same way, and I think the media has been completely irresponsible, whether or not human beings, even these documents that Americans, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, now we never really believe that for everybody, but let's put it on the table. Life requires healthcare. Life requires a fair wage for the work that I do. Life requires shelter. Why do we let them take things that are necessary for human flourishing and politicize them? We can fight about some other stuff, but we ought not fight about if people ought to be living outdoors. What the hell kind of person is okay with that? What the hell kind of senator is okay with you, Mitch McConnell, having Cadillac healthcare, but the people in Kentucky are dying of black lung? That is deeply unhuman. That should be a political discussion. Mm-hmm. Right. Some things should be off the political table if we believe that every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. But we know that their politics are based on dehumanization. When Ronald Reagan began his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, announced his candidacy, standing on the bones of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, he was sending a message to the South. When George H.W. Bush used that Willie Horton ad, when they darken skin, they know what they are doing. They are doing politics on the basis of white supremacy, and not only that, more importantly, anti-blackness. Their policies are anti-Blackness. Their theology is, but the problem with anti-Blackness is it don't just kill us, it kills everybody. What happened at the Capitol on the 6th? Deeply anti-Black. But they were going to kill Nancy Pelosi, and they were going to also kill Mike Pence, and they ain't Black.
Right.
To be
So
clear,
that leads me into
death is death.
Right, right. And so that leads me into the next question. So your church was vandalized by domestic terrorists. And what did that event say to you about faith freedom in America, when many of the ones who tore down your Black Lives Matter sign claim the same Christian faith as you? You know, we're having this conversation as two people that claim Christian faith, and further conversations that I have in weeks to come. I won't be talking to another Christian because faith freedom and Black faith freedom is so diverse.
That's right.
You know, it's so diverse. But right now, in this context, when you have that happen, how does that even come about? They claim the same religion as you, yet the BLM sign says something different for them.
Well, I think, again, and I tried to write about this in the little thing that we all wrote together, that Black people have freedom of faith only to the point where it jostles with white supremacy, right? I'm to the point that it questions. So Martin King was okay to be a preacher until he preached that the American Empire had no business in Vietnam killing people. Then he had to stop. Then both Black people and white people said, King, you're on your own. So let's talk about the BLM side. And I like to get at it anecdotally. So we hired a security team because we knew some stuff was going down. I've got pictures of people walking by our church using obscene gestures, walking by cursing at us. There was a woman in MAGA, full MAGA regalia, in a wheelchair who had gone down to the protest on the 6th. She was wheeled by the front of Metropolitan by some gentleman in a MAGA hat, I assumed her relative or husband. She walked by the chief of our security and said, the reason we're here, so January 6th, is because we hate niggers. That's what she said. So what I appreciate about her is she just like dispensed with all the liberty talk and we love Jesus talk. She told us why she was there. Here's the problem with them coming on our property. First of all, it's ours. But because you believe this is your land, you do not respect the rights that I have, that we have. You come, you destroy the sign. And really for me, Charles, I saw it as more than the sign. We bought another sign. As I said, the sign we got now is twice as big, it's twice as Black. Come tear that one down. I put up one that's bigger and blacker than that. You keep tearing that one down. I put up one as big as Washington, D.C. I'm gonna keep putting them up. The challenge is this. They are assaulting fundamentally my right to exist, our right to assert theological independence. We may disagree, but Charles, me and you grew up essentially in the same situation. Our grandmothers and grandfathers would kill us even if we went to a Klan church and defaced their stuff, because it's not ours to deface. We were not brought up that way. And fundamentally, because, I've had to wrestle with this idea of anti-Blackness, their identity is so fundamentally anti-Black as to seek to erase our ancestral existence, our history, our contributions. Tearing down that sign was a proxy for tearing me up.
Wow, wow. And you know, I have to say this, we're going to conclude in a few here, but I have to say that the connection here is kind of sort of eerie in a way, because, you know, you being a pastor of an AME church, I grew up Baptist. Catch me on whatever day you catch me on. I went to the Citadel, for better or for worse. Sometimes you went to HBCU. But being at Citadel, that means I was in Charleston, South Carolina, which also means I was in the city of Mother Emanuel AME Church. And at the Citadel, I actually took this African-American history class. 26 European Americans and 2 African Americans. I was one of the 2. And it just so happened I wasn't a freshman then. I wasn't a knob, as we call them. We had a knob, a freshman was the other African American. So he sat in the front of the class and didn't say anything because he didn't want anything to happen. Me, I had a little more freedom because I was an upperclassman. I bring that up because we read the story of Denmark Vesey, something like say. And I had a teammate sitting behind me, a football teammate sitting behind me that just flat out said, I don't care about Black people. It's their fault that they're in the situation they're in. And so we are there together at the same place. You're blocking for me this afternoon on the football field. You're one of my offensive linemen, but you don't care about who I am as a person in this. And so we're sitting in the African-American history class, learning about Denmark Vesey at the Citadel that was formed just in case the slaves ever revolted again. It's so much deepness in that. But I bring it together to say this. That same young man was at the Capitol for the riots.
Are you serious, Charles?
He posted pictures. He was there. But also connecting it to Dylan Roof and the things that he wrote in his manifesto that talks about basically Christian nationalism. That, hey, America is white, America is Christian, and anything other than that is a problem and should be dealt with. And he dealt with it in a violent, forceful manner. People can say tearing down a sign is one thing, but I think you bring up something so much deeper. That wasn't just property they were tearing down. They were trying to tear down you as a human being and me as a human being and anybody that looks like us. And so race is at the pit of all of this. And until we acknowledge that, we can't heal. We can't have faith, freedom for all. We can't do it. And you and I can see it. And many of our European American brothers and sisters can see it. But we still have a segment of people that will not see it and refuse to see it. And sometimes, some days you catch me and I'm just distraught because it's almost like James Baldwin said, to be woke in this country is to be at a constant state of rage. You have to just sometimes just wait from it. So, brother, I say all that to say I'm glad that we are able to have this conversation. I'm glad that people are tuning into this conversation. And I'm glad we're going to have more of these conversations because Black faith freedom is American faith freedom. You can't separate the two of them.
No doubt about it. And I just want to thank you, brother, for the good work that you do. Thankful that your light is in the world. Really am.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you all for joining us for this segment of Voices of Faith Freedom. We'll be back next week, and I'll actually be talking with the founder of and president of Black Non-Believers, Medisa Thomas.
Good people.
Great organization. You know, Medisa.
Good people.
If we're going to talk about faith freedom for all, we have to talk about it in the context of everybody, not just people of faith. We have to start with the human first. So this conversation here will be on our YouTube channel. And also you can find it, the replay of this on our Facebook Live channel. So thank you again, Brother William, for this conversation. And I look forward to us working together again in the future.
Thank you, brother. Take care.